Welcome to Life Stories, where we share powerful tales of resilience, love, and the lessons life teaches us along the way. Today's story is about a mother, Emily, who, after years of hardship and sacrifice, finds herself facing judgment and cruelty from her future son-in-law's family. As tensions rise, Emily must decide how to stand up for herself and her daughter, Sophie, in the face of adversity. This story is a testament to the strength that comes from within and the importance of never compromising your values. Please subscribe to our channel to begin today's journey. My name is Emily, and I never thought I'd find myself in a situation like this. Life had always been a struggle, but in the end, I had learned that the heart is a resilient thing, capable of enduring the hardest of circumstances. At the age of 48, after raising my daughter Sophie alone for so many years, I was finally starting to feel like I could breathe again. It hadn't been an easy journey, and at times, I doubted myself, but I did it. I had to. I had been married once, to a man who, I suppose, had once seemed like the right choice. But over time, I learned that he wasn't. My ex-husband was a good man at heart, but he was also lazy and unambitious. He preferred to spend his days drinking, and when things got difficult, he ran away from them. Our financial situation was on the brink, and after years of trying to fix things, trying to reason with him, to ask him to change, I realized that it was no longer just about me. It was about Sophie. I couldn't raise her in that kind of environment. I remember the day I filed for divorce. Sophie was just 3 years old. It was one of the hardest decisions I had ever made. There was no child support, no alimony. From that point on, it was just Sophie and me against the world. I had to find work. And at first, I did whatever I could. Small jobs I could do from home, working around Sophie's schedule. The pay was always tight, and sometimes there was no money for food. But Sophie never knew. I made sure she had everything she needed, even when I had to go without. Sophie, as she grew, became more than just my daughter. She became my greatest motivation. Every time I felt like giving up, I thought of her. She deserved better, and I would make sure she had it. When Sophie graduated and began working herself, I felt the weight of the years lift a little. It was as if a door had opened for both of us. And for the first time, I felt like life was finally going to get better. Then, a wonderful thing happened. Sophie found someone special. His name was Jack, and he worked with Sophie at the same company. He was her boss, 5 years older than her. And from the moment I heard about him, I knew he was someone serious. Sophie once showed me a picture of him. He seemed like a decent, hard-working young man. I couldn't have asked for a better partner for Sophie. After everything we had been through, I finally felt like Sophie had found someone who would take care of her. Someone stable, someone dependable. A far cry from her father's example. One evening, after dinner, Sophie looked at me with a nervous expression. I could see the hesitance in her eyes as she spoke. "Mom, I need to talk to you about something." There was a pause, and my heart skipped a beat. Something was off. "What is it, darling?" I asked gently, my voice full of concern. I could feel the weight of her worry in the room, and it made me anxious. She hesitated, her fingers fidgeting in her lap before she smiled shyly. "I'm going to marry Jack." In that moment, I felt a rush of emotions. Happiness, pride, even a little relief. I had always hoped for this for her. And now it was happening. "Oh, Sophie, that's wonderful news," I said, beaming at her, my heart swelling with joy. "Congratulations." She let out a breath she'd been holding, clearly relieved. "I was worried you might not approve." "Why would I not approve?" I replied warmly, a smile on my face. "You're an adult now, and if Jack makes you happy, then that's all that matters to me." Sophie seemed to relax. "I was hoping you could meet him this weekend. I want you to get to know him before the wedding." "Of course, darling," I agreed without hesitation. I'd love to meet him. The following Sunday, I waited eagerly at home. The clock was ticking, and at just before 10 a.m., the doorbell rang. My heart raced a little as I opened the door. There stood Sophie, her bright smile warming my heart. and beside her was Jack. He was polite, just as I had expected. "Nice to meet you, Miss Emily," he said with a warm handshake. His demeanor calm and respectful. "Come on in," I said, inviting them into the house. We sat down together, and Jack handed me a box of fancy chocolates as a gift, a sweet gesture that made me feel at ease. We began talking, and Jack shared how he and Sophie had met at work. Sophie blushed, clearly a little embarrassed by his enthusiasm, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of hope for her future. This was the kind of man I had always hoped she would find. But then, just as I was starting to feel at ease, the atmosphere shifted. Jack asked, "By the way, is your husband at work today?" The question hit me like a punch to the stomach. I glanced at Sophie, and her face went pale. It was clear she hadn't told Jack about our family situation, about her father's absence, about how I had raised her on my own. The silence in the room felt suffocating. I took a deep breath and decided to be open. "Chloe might not have mentioned this, but I'm divorced. I raised her on my own." For a brief moment, Jack's friendly smile disappeared, and his face went blank. I could feel the tension in the air. I felt exposed, vulnerable, but then, as quickly as it appeared, the expression was gone, replaced by a forced smile. "Oh, nothing. Don't worry about it," he said, though his reaction lingered in my mind. As the visit continued, I couldn't shake the feeling that Jack might have concerns about us, about me, and as they left, I found myself wondering if this was going to become an issue later on. What if Jack's family didn't approve of Sophie marrying into a single-parent household? But Sophie, ever the optimist, assured me that everything would be fine. "Don't worry, Mom," she said. "He hasn't said anything to me. Let's just focus on the good stuff." Still, I couldn't shake that nagging feeling. What if things weren't as simple as they seemed? Time would tell. A few days later, Sophie came to me again. This time her face shadowed with something more serious than I had seen before. She walked into the living room. Her shoulders slumped and her eyes darker than usual. My heart sank. I could tell something was wrong, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions. "Mom, I need to talk to you," she said softly, her voice carrying an unfamiliar weight. I set aside the book I had been reading and turned my full attention to her. "What's going on, sweetheart?" I asked, my concern deepening with every passing second. Sophie rarely looked like this. Her usual optimism and brightness dimmed. She hesitated, playing with her fingers, clearly searching for the right words. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mom, it seems Nathan's family isn't happy about our marriage." The words hit me hard, like a blow to the chest. Sophie's face was full of sadness. But there was something else too, an exhaustion. As if she had been carrying this burden alone for far too long. "Why, what's the problem?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady despite the growing ache in my chest. Sophie sighed deeply, her head dropping into her hands. "They think that Nathan's going to have a hard time because because we're poor, and because I come from a single-parent household." His mom said it outright. "And his sister, too. They think we're only after Nathan's money." I felt a wave of anger and hurt wash over me. It was as if someone had slapped me across the face. How could they think that of us? How could they judge us without even knowing us? Without understanding how hard I worked every day? How much I sacrificed for Sophie to have a better life? I took a deep breath, trying to keep my composure. "That's a terrible thing to say," I said, my voice trembling with emotion. "How could they judge us like that?" Sophie nodded silently, her face a mixture of frustration and defeat. "And it's not just that. Nathan's mother said, she said we were only after his money." She paused, choking back a tear. "It's so unfair, Mom. You know I don't care about his money. I've worked hard for everything I have. Just like Nathan." I could see the hurt in Sophie's eyes. And it broke my heart. She had grown up watching me struggle, watching me fight to make ends meet. She knew better than anyone that I had never once asked for anything from anyone, let alone a man. I reached over and took her hands in mine, squeezing them gently. "You've always been strong, Sophie, And you don't need to justify yourself to anyone. Especially not them. You've earned everything you have. Just like I did. Sophie looked up at me. Her eyes brimming with tears. But it hurts. Mom, they don't even know us. And yet they're already judging us. I nodded, understanding her pain all too well. I know, sweetheart, I know. But as long as Nathan supports you, that's all that matters. People like that, they won't change. No matter how hard you try. You can't control their opinions. What you can control is your own heart. Your own happiness. Her eyes brightened slightly at my words. But the worry still lingered. Nathan did defend me, though. He told them I'm not like that. That I have a stable job. And reminded them that we both work at the same company. So, at least he's on my side. That brought me a small amount of comfort. Knowing Nathan was standing up for her. That's a good sign. Sophie, he's a good man. You've found someone who truly cares about you. And that's what matters most. But even as I spoke the words of reassurance, a small voice in the back of my mind wondered if this was the beginning of something bigger. If Nathan's family's disapproval would grow. If their judgment would seep into their lives and cause more tension between them. Would it affect their marriage in the long run? Sophie didn't seem as reassured as I hoped. Mom, I'm just so tired of this. I don't know how much more of this I can handle. I want to marry Nathan. But I don't want to be part of a family that doesn't accept me. I pulled her into a tight hug. You don't have to take their judgment. Sophie, you and Nathan are building a life together. And you don't need anyone else's approval to be happy. You just need each other. As I held her close, I couldn't help but feel a pang of fear. I had been through enough in my life to know that sometimes things don't go as planned. Sometimes, even the best intentions can be challenged by the harshness of others. Would Sophie and Nathan be strong enough to face the judgments that were already coming their way? Would their love be enough to overcome the obstacles they would undoubtedly face? Only time would tell. But one thing I knew for sure, no matter what happened, I would be there for Sophie. And I would fight for her. Just as I always had. A few days after Sophie's heartbreaking revelation, things took a turn. She came to me once again. Her face pale and her shoulders heavy with the weight of another difficult conversation. This time, there was no hesitation in her voice. Only quiet resignation. Mom, Nathan's mother wants to have a family meeting before the wedding. Sophie said, her words coming out slowly. Almost reluctantly. I blinked, taken aback. A family meeting? What kind of meeting? I asked, my mind racing to figure out what this could mean. We hadn't had much contact with Nathan's family before. But I knew things hadn't gone smoothly when we'd first met. This sudden meeting didn't sit right with me. Sophie sighed, her face downcast. She said it's common sense for you to meet them properly before the wedding. She's arranged it at a fancy restaurant near their house. She even chose the place. A sense of unease settled in my stomach. The fact that they were insisting on a meeting, especially one held at a high-end restaurant, struck me as strange. Something about it felt off. And what did she say about meeting at her house? I asked, trying to keep the concern from my voice. Sophie looked embarrassed as she shifted uncomfortably. She said it would be inappropriate to meet at their house since we're not officially married yet. And the restaurant, it's $500 per person. She paused, clearly waiting for my reaction. I felt my breath catch. $500 per person? I repeated, the number feeling like a slap in the face. The audacity of it left me momentarily speechless. That's outrageous. Sophie, why such an expensive place? And why isn't she hosting us at her home? Like people usually do when meeting family before a wedding? Sophie's eyes filled with embarrassment. I know, Mom. It feels uncomfortable to me too. But I didn't want to argue with her. Nathan even said he'd reimburse us later if it's too much. The thought of paying for a lavish meal that seemed designed to belittle us made me sick. I wanted to argue with Sophie. But I could see the strain in her eyes. She didn't want to make things harder than they already were. After a moment of silence, I took a deep breath and nodded. All right. If it's important to you, we'll go. But I want you to know that this kind of behavior isn't normal. They're not being respectful. Sophie, The day of the meeting came, and I decided to dress as modestly as possible. I didn't want to give Nathan's family any reason to think I was trying to show off or be flashy. I chose a simple dress, applied just a touch of makeup, and kept my hair neatly styled. When Sophie and I arrived at the restaurant, we were escorted to a private room where Nathan's family was already waiting. The tension in the air was palpable. Nathan greeted us with a warmth that made me feel somewhat at ease. But his family, his mother, Linda, and his sister, Rachel, were stiff, their expressions cold. I offered a polite smile as I introduced myself. "It's a pleasure to meet all of you," I said, trying to break the ice. But Linda didn't return my smile. Instead, she leaned back in her chair, a smirk playing on her lips. Her words came out as if they were carefully chosen to wound. "I hope this meeting clears up everything," Linda said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Honestly, I think this marriage is a mistake." My stomach dropped. I forced myself to keep calm, though her words cut deep. "Excuse me?" I said, trying to keep my composure. Linda's bluntness didn't stop there. "You're from a single-parent family. That's already a problem," she continued, her eyes scanning me critically. "And judging by how plain your outfit is, it's clear you're struggling financially." I felt my face flush with embarrassment. It wasn't the kind of embarrassment that comes from making a mistake or being clumsy. No, this was something deeper, something that dug into the very core of me. To be judged so harshly by someone who didn't know a thing about me, about how hard I'd worked to get here, was unbearable. Sophie's sister-in-law, Rachel, couldn't resist joining in. "Poor Nathan," she sneered. "He could have married someone decent. But instead, he's stuck with a poor mother and daughter." I could feel the anger rising inside me. But I bit my tongue. I didn't want to make things worse for Sophie. So, I stayed calm. "We may not have much," I said, my voice steady but firm. "But Sophie and I have worked hard to build a good life. We don't need anyone's money." Linda's laugh was cruel and dismissive. "That's easy to say, but actions speak louder than words. Don't they?" she said, clearly enjoying my discomfort. Nathan, who had been sitting quietly, finally spoke up, his voice firm. "Mom, that's enough," he said, his eyes narrowing. "Chloe and her mother deserve respect." But Linda just waved him off. "I'm only speaking the truth," she said. "If you marry Chloe, you'll be taking on their burdens. You'd be making a huge mistake." The insults continued, each one more cutting than the last. I stayed polite for Sophie's sake, but my patience was wearing thin. I could see the discomfort in Nathan's face, but he said nothing more. Linda, on the other hand, seemed to take pleasure in our unease. And then, the staff began to bring out the food. As each plate of beautifully presented appetizers was placed in front of the others, I glanced down at my own plate. There was nothing, just a glass of water. My stomach twisted in confusion. What was happening? Was this some kind of cruel joke? Rachel, noticing my reaction, burst into mocking laughter. "Oh, look at that. How fitting," she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. Sophie leaned in, her voice filled with concern. "Mom, are you okay?" Linda's voice rang out, cruel and deliberate. "Poor people can manage with just water," she said, enjoying every second of it. It was too much. I couldn't stay silent anymore. "What does this mean?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm, though inside, I was seething. Linda shrugged, her smirk widening. "Not only are you a poor single mother, but are you also stupid? Did you really think someone like you would be welcomed here?" My jaw clenched. I had endured a lot in my life, but nothing had prepared me for this level of cruelty. I took a deep breath, trying to hold it together. I would not let them see me break. But inside, I was raging. In the end, I couldn't take it anymore. As the insults continued, something inside me snapped. I looked at Sophie, her face filled with both anger and sadness. I couldn't let her endure this anymore, not for my sake. Not for anyone's. I stood up, my hands trembling with emotion, and turned to face Linda and her family. "Enough," I said, my voice firm and unwavering. I won't stand here and let you disrespect me or my daughter any longer. You may not accept us, but we don't need your approval to be happy. We've made our own way in life, and we'll continue to do so, without your judgment. The room fell silent. For the first time, Linda's smug expression faltered. Michael, her husband, looked at me with a mix of disbelief and fear, while Rachel, who had been so eager to mock us, suddenly stopped laughing. Nathan, who had been silent up until that point, stood up beside me, his voice strong as he spoke to his family. This is not how I was raised. You've disrespected the woman I love and her mother, and I won't tolerate it. I don't need a family that treats the people I care about like this. With that, he turned to me. Mom, I'm sorry. I should have said something sooner. I smiled at him, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. Thank you, Nathan. You've shown me what true love and respect look like. Sophie and I left the restaurant, hand in hand, with our heads held high. We didn't need their approval, and we certainly didn't need their toxic attitudes. In the end, the lesson was clear. True strength lies not in what others think of you, but in your ability to rise above it all and stay true to yourself. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to our channel for more inspiring life stories.